Howdy, Trigunners! Welcome to Tripod Maximum, a Trigun podcast where fans come together to discuss all versions of Yasuhiro Naito's iconic series. I'm Music Meg, and today I'm joined by the Trigun Ultimate Overhaul Team. What is the Overhaul, you may ask? It's a fan translation of the manga that aims to be as close to the original Japanese script as possible, and to provide a proper localization through a smooth, coherent reading experience, all presented on crystal clear scans. They have a big focus on showing the utmost respect towards the creator, source material, and the cultural origins. Now that that's out of the way, let's stampede off into the episode.
I'm Dee. I am the project lead of Trigun Ultimate Overhaul.
Hi Meg, glad to be here. I'm Vulpine, or Vol for short. I am one of the proofreaders, localizers, quality control, emotional support members of the team.
And boy, do we need emotional support.
So how did you guys, how did this project start? Was it how you got into Trigun that made you see a need for it, or was there something else that drove the need for this project?
Well, originally, I was like the one who started the project many, many years ago. It started as sort of just like a little hobby side thing back in like the late 2018, early 2019. I just liked working with the digital media in general, so I did some manga editing and stuff. And then, while I was reading the manga the first time, I came to the discovery that there were two translations of it, and as many new fans of the manga experienced when they were looking for the manga itself, was that they would stumble upon a very particular translation of it that leaves a lot to be desired. A previous fan translation. So I very quickly decided then to find another translation, which is when I found the official one in like scan format, which was adequate and certainly a lot more passable for its presentation. But there was still that feeling that you felt like you were missing something, and there were a lot of things that you didn't or you wouldn't catch in the first place because of the strange writing and the usual issues that would come with Japanese to English translation, in which there would just be a particular speech pattern going on that seems rigid and strange. So I myself already kind of felt that was something wrong here. And then looking into people posting about it years prior and seeing so many people lamenting Trigun not having a better translation. And eventually I kind of just thought about it and thought to myself, you know what? I might as well do it. I mean, I like working with language. I like working with digital media. I'll do it. So I just started in a vacuum. There was not really anybody asking me to do it. It was just for my own personal interest that I began. Of course, it's the quality of the initial idea of what I wanted to do has changed. It was a lot more like a hybrid thing to begin with, where I would kind of proofread some of the things or some things here and there from the Japanese version and then compare it to the old fan translation and the Dark Horse's official translation, and sort of like make it like a little bit of a hybrid thing. But as I continue working and I got some people help me as well over the time, I changed my goal to being a full, complete new translation when I realized that all the translations got shit wrong. and and once you like really start like realizing how much can be how much like things can be misunderstood, and how much some lines really needed like to be reworked into a much better presentation of the information you were giving in Japanese, it just became a full translation automatically, and really could only leave the trust in what we were translating down to doing it ourselves completely. So I jumped into like then doing the Japanese translation, and which was a lot more like certainly I'm more like hitting my head against the wall to begin with, and as I worked on it longer and longer, definitely developed a lot more tools and other helpful ways in which I could make that process a little easier because I haven't learned Japanese other than by myself, so it there is certainly and probably a lot of ways I could do this a lot more effectively, but it's a slow and steady process of just always double checking and reassuring and double checking, along with some people that I know who are already fluent in Japanese who can double check a few things here and there to be the quality control of the translations.
When you mentioned like when you were looking the official translation, you're referring to the Dark Horse English translation was
Yeah,
kind of where you no okay. Yeah, I just
yeah,
wanted to clarify
that's
that.
the one that you would also find in the physical copies as well, and the newly released omnibuses.
Right.
And but yeah, as I kept working on this, some years passed, and I eventually, changed a few other group members until we are now settled with our current team, which includes Vol,
Mm-hmm.
and also includes Arth, who is our scanner, and also proofreader and token southerner.
Yeah.
That's right. So Arth has the task that takes much strength to rip apart the physical copies and scan them, unbind them.
Yes. Yes. The
There's
good thing though is that Artha is very much a collector. So she is on it in terms of like finding the rare publications, the rare magazines, the rare merch, and just no hesitation for doing what needs to be done.
I would be so scared to do that, especially if it was something rare or hard to get.
Mhm, mhm.
But, I think thinking about the ultimate sacrifice and uh what it means for the fandom to be able to make it more accessible that way. It's worth it. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, definitely a lot of strength and courage. So I'm gonna send that from me to Arth as they continue to do that for us.
Well,
Yeah.
it's what makes a Trigun Ultimate is the ultimate sacrifice.
I know when I
Lots
saw
of
you
money.
guys when I saw you added, was it the red and blacks? And then I realized what you had to do to get those scans. I'm like, oh my goodness.
I
Oh,
Like,
will say, luckily the damage done to the red and blacks was pretty minimal because of the way that the books are already made. They are very, very loosely hacked. They're not like a
okay,
very, very like hard spine book.
that's good.
So it was not as total destruction as some of the Japanese omnibuses that unfortunately have to give their life for our cause.
Like the old ones, they're like super thick. They're bigger than a Bible. I know what ones you're talking about. Those ones.
Well, the Japanese ones are a little thinner. The
Okay,
Japanese omnibuses than the English omnibuses because there are only two volumes in a Japanese omnibus. That's why there are so many of them. So they're not as thick, and but they still had to lose internal integrity
mm.
to to make proper scans of them.
And that's where Vol comes in, right, with the art. So if anything is lost, if you have like a centerfold spread.
No,
well,
that's me primarily.
Oh,
yeah.
that's you.
I,
Okay,
I've
okay. You think
I've helped out with some of like the cleanup and
Hmm.
redrawing in the past,
okay.
and when I can, but most of that is D. I did some work when we were putting together our multiple bullets scans. Had a lot of fun doing like the cleaning and redrawing for that. And for those who aren't familiar, multiple bullets is sort of a semi-canonical question mark collection of short stories set on in the landscape smoke, and most of those those short stories are by various uh, different mangakas within the manga industry. So it's sort of a an homage um, to Naito's body of work with Trigun.
And the chapters are made by various other mangaka. Some more known than others, including a few little art greetings by even more mangaka, including the artist of Full Metal Alchemist as well.
That's one of my favorite ones. Vash and Arakawa's style is super cute.
Yeah, yeah, he is.
Kind of makes me bummed that Arakawa didn't do a chapter.
Yeah, that I would have lost my mind.
Probably
In,
busy.
Yeah, yeah,
because
she probably was.
I feel like Arakawa maybe I don't know when she started or conceptualized her story and characters, but it's hard not to miss the visual iconography between Vash and Edward. So it's like big brother and little brother. Quite red
Quite
coats, missing
literally.
arms, blonde hair, sad brother story.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah, multiple bullets is a lot of fun. Probably the most canon chapter is Nightow's uh actual Badlands Rumble chapter, which is
I'm pretty
isn't
sure
it
those are
supposed
the only ones who can be counted canon, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that chapter actually takes place after the movie because it's teed up with that ending scene when the newspaper smacks Vash in the face and is it the Dodongo brothers? And then that's the conflict in the chapter, if I
Oh
remember
yeah,
correctly.
and double
Yep.
the frustration because it does, in a way, repeat a little bit the message from the movie one more
Hmm.
time, but in through Naito's way of presenting it,
Yeah.
which is always a little more brutal in some ways, because
Yeah.
Naito is he doesn't fuck around. Um,
He
No,
kind
he
he kind of does it with the storytelling anyway. He repeats things. It's I don't want to say beat a dead horse. Just a side note, but
not.
it does feel like, especially when there's the dialogue or conflict between Vash and Knives through the actual manga, they're just broken records to each other. And I would like to think that's intentional by Naito in his writing, but
well,
yeah,
there's only one person who truly knows. We can only
Mhm.
speculate.
somebody needs to ask him that.
But then after gutting a book and sacrificing so many pieces of Trigun merch for the greater good, the good of all, if you would will.
Mhm.
Uh, what we do next is that RF scans them, and I then receive the scans. I do the editing to make it look good. That would also include like removing the paper texture and kind of like really make it into like a proper black and white picture. So there's only like black and white, no grays, no none, all of that. Just so it has that cleanliness of a digital comic would have. And that's when I remove the Japanese text. Or well, first of all, I fix up if there's any damage, because even when we are pulling the books apart, there sometimes would be damage at the sides of the pages that needs to get rectified, or there is damage in the middle of a page if you have a double page spread that needs to get redrawn and put together. And most of the time, these double page spreads are actually not supposed to be complete pictures. They are missing like an inch or two of the art in the middle. And that needs to get drawn in again so that it becomes one whole picture without it looking weird. So when I put those together, I have to gauge where the distance between the two is supposed to be so that the art looks correct. Because something gets too close to each other, and then an arm becomes too short, or a leg becomes too short, or a gun becomes too short, and whatnot. But also to make sure that the written sound effects are also lining up. And then I can remove the Japanese text, including like the very big shouting bubbles or like a small text. Not the sound effects. The sound effects is something we've chosen to keep because it is an art form in of itself, and we do not remove the art, obviously. So
I I'm glad you do that because one of the criticisms people have about reading the manga is that it's a bit cacophonous and hard to follow.
Mhm.
I actually kind of like it. Maybe it's because I'm somebody that's read it multiple times and read it more as like the energy on the page. And so I do appreciate that you keep it in its original form because I do think it adds to the energy and the action on the page, and it's in Nighthow's hands still.
It's definitely very clear that that is intentional the way
Thank
that
you.
effects are being placed. That some is like really, really placed to give it that overwhelming feeling that this one noise it's like much louder than everything else. Then there are some to give the sense of very like complete silence and small sounds. And then it's also supposed to be complete and utter chaos where everything is like blasting off at the same time. It feels very intentional, and therefore the sound effect art itself is conveying an emotion of the sound and how it feels to the characters and the reader. Therefore, it should be kept in there. And we, of course, can then find the best way to work around it when we're gonna add the English translation to those sound effects eventually.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a classical musician, and Nightow to me, if he was a composer, he'd be Stravinsky, and Trigun's The Rite of Spring, where there's a lot of soft, almost silent moments, and then a lot of energy. So when I read it, um, I get that feel like I'm listening to Stravinsky sometimes. Just little personal plug from Meg. um,
Well, music in
he's
general is should be able to both be quiet and loud.
yep. So yeah, I know some people harp on Naito's style. I like it. It makes the quiet moments all that more impactful. Um, and really drives home when something um, has a lot of dynamic action or just an emotional moment. It's great. It takes a couple read throughs. It's not a story you can read once and understand everything going on, which I know we're going to talk about later, the story, but I think the art lends itself to the writing and the storytelling that way too.
Yeah. So then after we work through the art itself, is when the translation bit comes in, and it starts with a direct translation from the Japanese to English, which is the one I do, and I get like a rough translation out because it can be difficult when you're in the mind and your mind is in Japanese to set up some proper sentence structure, because Japanese does not really work with the same sentence structure, so things have to be moved around a little bit. So I make the rough translation. I bring that then to the overhaul team. We have our little meetings where the three of us would then be there to read the rough translations, and we would discuss how to best write each line to make it not only the most informative but concise as well. Because, as I also like to have always say when we were working on it, is that you never underestimate a reader's impatience. You need to convey things as quickly as possible in as few words as possible. Otherwise, there's more and more time for the mind to get muddied and muddled and lose attention. So it has to be quick. Not that people obviously can't read a whole sentence, but it just not too much fluff, or
Yeah,
the point will be lost.
I do want to add to that, like, when it comes to like manga and comics, is that people want to, like, it's all hype. So people want to get next thing. They want to know what's going to happen. So we have to keep them. We have to keep things moving along. Um, uh, I mean, granted, whatever the Naito is saying, we have to match what you know uh, what the character is like. Accuracy definitely comes first, but just with like the understanding that
Mm-hmm.
like you said, people don't have a lot of patience for purple pro unless it really serves the story. And the way that the people comic is very different from how people read or in books, articles, those sorts of things. So
Caveat to that would be unless it's legato dialogue, the flowery.
Well, we gotta contain him a little bit,
Yeah, gotta contain
yeah,
Legato a little bit. He could easily get out of hand.
Actually, legato's not even the worst when
yeah.
it comes to flowery language.
Oh, who would you consider?
Wolfwood.
Oh.
100% Wolfwood. But of course, during our work with making the lines, we have the utmost respect for the characters and how they're presented. So it's not that we're changing how any character talks, per se. We are, of course, giving the attention that each character speaks in a specific way so that you can tell them more easily apart, especially when they're talking to each other, because Naito is a little notorious for his vague speech bubbles without tails. So it's not always easy to say or tell who's saying what. So we have done a lot of thinking to make sure and to find ways to have each character speak in a distinct manner, at least as much you can with the English language, without having actual vocals. And
Is
even
there
then, that must be contained to a certain degree for readability.
is there a trick to reading Naito's speech bubbles?
Reading it a lot.
Yeah, reading it a
Like,
lot.
are the tales truly nonsensical, or does he have at least a pattern you can recognize with them? That's something you guys noticed when doing the scans, or like if it's changing voices, is there any indicator?
Yeah, usually when changing voice, he'll use a tail on his speech bubbles. Most part, he does not use tails on his bubbles to show. There's no visual cue or direction. Generally fast, but more of like a rule of thumb. Focus is be speaking without tails on their speech bubbles, and then when the speaking character within this, there will be a tail on the speech bubble to show which character is now speaking. When the panel changes and the second character is still speaking, then they won't have a tail on their speech bubble because they're now the focus. Shifts back character, then they would have a tail. So,
For the most part.
for the most part.
Speaking Naito language, yes. Reading and speaking Naito language 101.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
and if they are thinking, it will be a similar speech bubble. If they're thinking, it will just never have a tail if it's thinking.
Do you
text
ever
is
or do you
italicized.
do you ever have to change the size of the speech bubbles, or is it more the typesetting of the font that you will make smaller if like the translation lends itself to that it's more wordy in English and the speech bubbles stay the same so that you don't impede upon the art on the panels?
We try for the most part to never change the speech bubble in any way, shape, or form because the speech bubbles are already extremely tightly fit in with the art itself in each panel. So we try to make it fit the best we can and doing and retaining the same settings on our text as much as possible.
It is a typographic faux pas to constantly be changing the size of the text within a purpose, if that makes sense. You have shouting
And if we
Yeah.
be your
do,
shouting text be large, but like your basic dialogue font should be uniform.
oh yeah, if we do make some small changes to make things fit, it is under a lot of scrutiny and something that we often go through in the next bit of our process is that once we've gone through the translation the first time, I typeset the whole thing as well. Then we look at all the pages again with the translations, and then we can do some last minute editing because occasionally, even when you're doing typesetting, you might see something in a line and you're like, hey, I can change this a little bit. So you change a line again, or you feel forced to change a line to make it fit within a bubble better. And then we double check it the last time, which is also where we talk about if text becomes, if some of the text is too close to the sides of the bubbles, or if we then have to squish it a little bit, which part of the text we're gonna squish so that it does not impede on the readability. even then, only two letters within a word we might squish together because those two letters have a little bit more room to wiggle than other letters in the font we're using. So there's a lot of little tweaks here and there to make it more invisible.
Also, you might
But
even between two words, the line spacing, that might be what's tweaked, not the font size, but the spacing between the letters. You might have to
oh
go
yeah,
there. Okay.
Yeah.
and
Oh,
if you
cool.
take the word squeeze, we might just squeeze the two e's instead and nothing else.
Oh, wow.
In the,
So it's you guys are doing akin to when it's localized to the anime and it comes to the English voice actors, they have to match lip flaps. You're now matching Naito's panels with his intended words. So you guys, wow, okay, that's cool.
I've never
so we look at
thought
the
about it
same
that way, but
text
yeah,
many
that's
many
a
times.
that's a good way of thinking about it.
You guys you guys are doing the publishing version of English VA lip flapping. That's really cute and funny.
Yeah, minus the really rigid and weird anime speech patterns. We
Mhm.
do a lot of work to not have that effect on it because that is an unfortunate thing that happens in a lot of Japanese to English translations is that
Mhm.
that's why anime speech sounds has that way of talking that everybody just knows,
Yeah.
like the cliches of dubbed anime. Which just what happens when somebody doesn't want to sit down and try and think of line, but then there's also the lip flapping and stuff. So we are avoiding the anime cliches.
Yeah,
I
we
appreciate
also
that you do that with Trigun being a more mature story. Um,
I
it's
mean,
started.
Walla and I are both writers as a hobby, so we take our writing quite seriously.
Yeah. No, well,
yeah,
because I know
and
Trigun started out shonen, but it moved to the older age group, and I'm glad you took the care to make sure. I don't want to say tropes, but those stereotypes that typically happen kind of were spared in your overhaul for a more human adult story. Um,
yeah, thank you for that. And I think
think,
too, it's worth noting that
yeah,
we're doing this as a volunteer, unofficial fan project for free without like strict timetable. All those kind of anime tropes that have come up in the industry, which are probably the result of needing to crank things out so you can make more money.
mhm.
So we don't have producers and execs breathing down our necks saying,
You
You
only
"Do
don't
have
have
this,
me.
get it out faster."
you don't have shareholders screaming where the return is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, uh,
The only one that seems got breathing down their necks is me.
Mhm.
so what part of your process is the most labor? Both, and what is the easiest part when you're doing your project, or the quickest part?
That is very much comes down to like who you're asking, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would say definitely the most labor and time intensive is all of the visual work that Dee does. And like
Mm,
having help them out with the multiple bullets, doing that cleaning. Like Dee already sent me the pages that were balanced and had the paper textures removed. So like the black and white and grayscale tones were already, like good to go and nice and crisp as a McDonald's Sprite, if you will. Um,
Only way I work.
but like that's tons and tons and tons of hours D already spent just just being a complete Photoshop wizard.
mm.
Um, so I mean, I think I would have to say all of the prep work, all of the editing that D does to get the pages looking absolutely like immaculate professional quality. Um,
Yeah, it's a form of art restoration.
it
Yeah.
really is.
Oh,
You should put
what was that?
Photoshop on your resume. if you haven't
I mean, I
already.
have,
You
and I
you
did.
Okay,
could
good.
you
You
could put that
better.
as a hard skill on your resume, D, art restoration.
Well, I did put translation in my resume, and it got me a translator job.
Nice.
So I did put overhaul in my resume.
Fan projects count. There's
Yeah,
my,
fan
my
projects are
message
still projects.
my message to all the people out there: don't ever feel embarrassed about putting things on your fucking paper, on your resume that you feel is silly, because if you just word it a little bit differently, you are doing a form of work. Don't be afraid. Give yourself credit, even if it's silly.
Pretend you're like a spin doctor or something.
Yeah. Uh, yeah,
So
I
what
would
would
say one of the very labor-intensive part of the project, I would also say, is the cleaning bit. For an example, to balance the black and white scales and the paper, removing paper texture, I had to figure out a way to do that myself, by the way. I had like no tutorials for it, so I had to find a way to do that. And to do it specifically with this, because every scan is different, because every scanner is different, so it's different how deep these grains are and how much you need to edit to make it look good. So you can't use the same procedure with every scan. So I can't even give out tutorial to anybody else because they gotta find out what works best for whatever scans that they have. So I had to find a way to do that first, which also included a lot of trial and error, but I found a way to do it, which was a different way that we use for our 1.0 scans. Our 2.0 scans use an entire different procedure. I had to find for it because what we did with the 1.0 scans is that they had compression. I removed all the compression so that it looked like a completely crisp new picture once again, because the compression came from obviously being uploaded and being downloaded again. And since the 2.0 scans are our own scans all the way from the bottom with the books themselves, there is no compression because we work everything in PNGs, obviously. I just had to remove the texture. Then removing the texture per page and then balancing it again. And occasionally quickly cleaning up the sides if there is like a little bit of the top of the page that shows the scanner behind because the paper is out of the shot. Things like that. To do a whole chapter with that, depending on if Photoshop is messing around or not, sometimes it has a tendency of getting buggy and then it thinks that it takes 5 times as long to think about something for some godforsaken reason. I cannot tell why it happens. It just happens and then it stops again for some reason. But it can take like 10 seconds to save a picture suddenly and you don't know why. Doing one chapter takes this is without the cleaning, can maybe take like 5 minutes doing the balancing. But if I also have to do cleaning, making a chapter can take an hour. And if there's like a double page spreads, it can take up to 3 hours to finish a chapter. With
Wow.
everything entailed, including the art, restoration, the balancing, and all the other things that might be there.
And was this before translation and typesetting and final edits?
Yeah, I have to like also remove text bubbles. That's an extra hour on top, more depending on again how big the text is and how invasive it is. So it could take a while, depending on how substantial the art is. So yeah, we're talking like for a whole full chapter, just one chapter. We're not talking volume, one chapter. Can take from like 10 minutes to 4 hours,
Wow.
depending on art.
Just on the art part. Oh,
It's just like everything entailed, except for the typesetting. The typesetting is like a whole next thing. So yes, the art part's probably the most labor intensive and the one that takes the longest, and then the translation comes second.
okay. So you mentioned that you now have like a more uniform scanning compared to the first one. Is there any other differences everybody should expect to see when 2.0 comes out?
Much better scans. Super
Much
crisp,
better.
very huge.
What was that, Vol? The crisp as a McDonald's
Uh,
Sprite?
Yep, it's gonna like they are gorgeous. They're gonna blow people's minds.
Some of the
Um,
best fucking scans I've ever seen in my entire life.
yeah,
And this
yeah,
is not just my project, our
and
project.
Now, is
it's
this
gonna be like Naito's work. Like I don't think a lot of people have seen before. So we're very excited about it.
are there going to be any changes to your translation work in 2.0, or is it mainly focused on the art?
The translation part was actually the most important bit of it. The scans, the new scans, was a happy accident
Okay.
because we realized when we looked into uploading our 1.0 translation in other places than on Tumblr, things like manga decks and so on, we realized that our scans were not, or our translation too, was not allowed there because we used English scans. So our entire project was basically down the drain in that regard. So, and even then we had talked a lot in my older translation that leaves again things to be desired, and the quality has to be maintained because I have more tools now, or have more tools now than I had then. So there's room for improvement that is severely needed. Also with the typesetting itself, because we've gotten better at typesetting over time. We've gotten better at double checking our text. Like everything we got better. That's 16 volumes of experience.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
too, like the changes to the group over time, definitely with like the earlier volumes, there's I don't know, I feel like sometimes there's uh I don't know, it's just like a different dynamic that you can tell in the reading of the original version, not good or bad, just like different. So I think
Mhm.
going back and revisiting the earlier volumes, the original Trigun volumes, with our current team, which what hadn't taken shape yet when D was starting out. I think it's really going to be neat to see the changes, and hopefully we'll give it just a little bit more unified read.
Nice. And the new scans, is that the result of you as a project team were able to acquire like a high quality scanner or have access to a better one now? Like how did the scans quality get updated so much with this new version?
well, first of all, like we did sacrifice books.
Oh, what was
Sorry,
that?
D. Sorry. I'm just laughing because I know about the scanner.
um, there was like things about the old scans that we would have liked to have had better when we started to begin with, at least myself, and that is because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I was never really fully happy. And I would also like to say that it was our own scans, because it was not our own scans to begin with. Because I did not have a scanner myself to do manga scans when I began, so I used originals or scans that were already done of the Dark Horse Comics version of it. And I have searched diligently to find the original scanner, but I could not find them because obviously they deserve the credit for the work they've done. But I cannot for the life of me find out who did it. Um, but um, but then we realized that we could not use our project on manga decks and things like that because of the English scan. So we were forced to use Japanese scans if we wanted to have it uploaded anywhere. It's some strange copyright things going on that if
Mhm.
it's in English, it's more likely to be copyrighted out the ass than a Japanese scan.
My only guess would be, this is speaking from my music legal brain, is that it's English translation is probably much like a mechanical license to like cover a song, and that's probably where it gets muddy. It's not a direct
Mhm.
license.
Mhm.
Um, that would be my best guess. Do not take legal advice from me. I'm just spitballing what I know about music publishing and wondering if it's the same for the manga world.
I mean, it makes sense that you put
I
an
mean,
English translation on top of an
yeah,
English translation is a little bit more gray. Well,
Yeah.
It
it's
probably
all
is more like a derivative work, kind of falls
Yeah.
more under the category of like fan work. Uh,
Dark Horse owns the rights to their work on Trigun, despite Naito owning the whole IP. He'd have to grant them some kind of license so they could own their work and make money.
yeah. So we then decided to look into getting our own Japanese scans. And that's where we found out that our own scans could be that much better, as they are.
Nice.
And Art was the one who had access to a scanner, a business grade scanner at her workspace. So she's bringing in all of these mangas to her work cubicle, ripping them up and scanning them on in her work time.
On company time. That's awesome.
Don't tell her work.
uh-uh.
And that is how we got our scans. So
Yeah.
then Art sends them to me. I double check them. I make sure that they're not like too wonky. And whenever there might be a mistake or something with a singular scan, I'll let her know the next day, or even maybe in the next 10 minutes, I have a new scan of it,
that's
and
that's
so
so
on and so forth.
that's so funny. I think we all can relate that we all do a bit of fan projects, whether it's fanfics, writing, art, or whatever, on company time.
Mhm.
That is a shared fandom experience, but that one's pretty intense. Bringing
Yeah.
physical copies in and ripping them apart, and the work scanner going to town.
Yeah. Don't ever say corporate America never did nothing for nobody. So
Maybe making the best of it.
yeah.
That's
And
funny.
so yeah, the differences you can expect from 2.0 as from like 1.0 is a new updated translation, better scans,
Mm.
sound effect translations, and yeah, maybe a little few updated graphics here and there. Our credit pages have always also been a funny little side project to do, a little creative project because each credit page we make for each volume is different.
I do like
Yeah.
your team's credit pages because it highlights maybe some panel art that in the moment you're like, oh, that's nice, but then it kind of gets to highlight it again. And sometimes I look at your credit pages and those panels become my favorite.
And sometimes they include a little bit of
Suffering.
suffering from me to you as a Japanese. We must share of this gift slash burden.
Yep.
Oh yeah, especially if
Uh,
it's a depressing chapter and it's like here's a little reminder.
yep. Yep. I will say another thing that we are excited about with the 2.0 version of the Trigun Overhaul is we want to include the Japanese omake chapters that were in the Japanese um, omnibus volumes that were not published in the English omnibus volumes. Sort of an ongoing little series of chapters that Naito included that did not make it into the official English
Oh,
translations. And to the best of our knowledge, no other group as an unofficial fan project. So,
ooh, I'm
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 also
I'm
pretty
really
sure
excited about that.
the deluxe editions don't include them either. I'm pretty sure,
oh really?
as far as I know. But don't take my word on it. I only have one of the books,
Where
so I
Gotcha.
would
don't know.
where would those amakes be located? Because I have copies of the Japanese manga and then I have the deluxe.
It has to be the omnibus.
Yeah.
Oh, in the omnibus. Oh, so the Japanese omnibus.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I've probably never seen these before.
not the single Japanese volumes. Yeah, sorry, that maybe wasn't clear in my explanation. But the
So,
Japanese omnibus, collected omnibus.
oh,
But
that's really exciting.
if anybody's looking to know what also to expect from 2.0, you can look at our multiple bullets translation. That one uses our own new scans, the size that you can expect from our future scans, the new ways we might make credit pages, and it also includes newer translations, as it was something we did after Maximum. And that also includes the multiple bullets translation of ours, translations of the other chapters which have never been ever been posted on the internet before for some reason. Nobody has
wow.
posted the entire book on the internet there if you can't buy it or you don't want to buy it.
But please consider buying it to support Naito.
Absolutely. Remember,
Yeah,
if you want to support Naito, you can't buy secondhand products because that only supports whoever is selling it. You have to buy directly from one of the publishers if you want to actually support him.
yeah, and the Japanese copies of the manga, and like you said, I don't think Multiple Bullets, does it have an English print? I don't think it does.
Yes, it
Yes.
It does.
does. Yep,
Okay.
through Dark Horse as well.
Okay.
Yep.
I wonder if they're going to do something with that in the deluxe too. Probably not.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, and also surprised if they did, because the Multiple Bullets was sort of a celebration collection for the release of the Badlands Rumble movie.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so tell us about the manga art and the visuals.
Man, oh man, where do I even begin with that?
Big
Um,
one.
just as like a little bit of background for myself and where I'm coming from. Um, I among other things, trained in several many different visual media for um, arts, crafts, graphic design, which is a passion of mine. For those who are wondering, um, yeah, theater, literature, writing. I'm basically a Renaissance person. No
Yep.
big deal. But anyway, I'm an artist. I love art. Tuning my horn aside, um, and I just love Naito's art style. Um, he First of all, I do want to mention that all of Trigun and Trigun Maximum was illustrated by hand using pen and ink on paper. So I believe Naito used a combination of, like halftone screens for texture. Also, liquid ink with like nibbed pens and markers, uh, liner pens, all sorts of different ways. But the end of the day, it was physical ink on physical paper, um, which is mm, one of the techniques that I learned from an American Western perspective. So I initially recognized like a lot of what he was doing from even the first time I read the manga. I think what makes Naito's artwork so attractive, to me at least, is that it is it's like, well, like many things he does, it's not your average, it's not your average manga. He uses really bold, thick, heavy lines. They're very dynamic. He packs loads and loads of details into into his pages. There's so much storytelling going on visually. He's so excited about drawing characters in cool poses, about creating environments that are entirely unique and bring certain, atmospheres. Um, and all of this he's able to express in a large part, I think, through his line work. Um, what's really impressive about that to me is that heavy, bold lines take a lot of time and a lot of energy. I think the part of the reason why really light, thin, delicate lines are the standard and also very popular in manga is because they are fast and easy to draw. It's a lot easier to put down a light line with one stroke and a thin pen than to commit to using a heavy pen, drawing a heavy bold stroke, and then going over it and making it even bolder. So if you're looking to to read the Trigun manga or any of Naito's other work for the first time or the 100th time, I just encourage you to take a moment and look at his lines, look at what he's doing, because it's really amazing, and it's something that no one else is doing right now, for the most part, at least that I'm aware of, and something that I don't think a lot of people did in the past when Trigun was running.
Yeah, I'm trying to think too of other work that comes close to it that's not Western comic book.
Yeah, and he was greatly influenced by American comic books in the 90s, which I think is a huge part of where his style comes from. And having, like I said, studying American pen and ink techniques, being able to recognize those in his work was really cool. Um, Absolutely, huge influence with American comics.
I'm looking at I have one of the Comicers magazines open in front of me, and there's a spread where he's in an interview talks about which things, and there's Hellboy and Slade and a
Mm,
couple older manga I'm not familiar with. The Art of Mobius, which is just an original artist in himself that did a lot of sci-fi landscapes and things. So I'll be sure to include that in like some show notes on the
yeah,
podcast socials,
and,
because it's relevant to this talk. But yeah, it's his art style is definitely unique.
yeah, and Venom. He is a
Venom
huge Venom fan, Venom from
And
Spider-Man.
Spawn.
and
Uh,
Spawn, yeah. Isn't there like
Spawn, yeah,
a bottle of liquor that Bash has seen with a lot called Grifter or Drifter, and it's got like Spawn's face on the logo?
It's
it's
got
got
Grifter on it.
grifters.
Oh, Grifter.
Grifter,
I've got them mixed up. I'm so silly. Thank you.
but yeah, I mean, like, the shows you how much of a nerd I am. Grifter is a superhero, anti-hero, from Wildstorm Comics publication that's now it's been bought out by DC years ago. So the fact that and it was always kind of like a niche little comic, the Wildstorm cast, probably best known for the Authority comics, with Midnighter and Apollo, probably the best known out of that group. But I digress as I push my glasses up on my nose. So the fact that Naito's like, hey, I'm gonna put this tiny little Easter egg in for this comic book that I happen to love and does not have a wide publication, it shows you just like has for American comics and also what a gigantic, enormous nerd he is too.
I love that all of Trigun is just him putting in everything he likes and slapping it together and it somehow works.
Mhm.
He's just very uninhibited with his artistic expression, and I think that's pretty aspirational. Also, I'm looking at Grifter. Grifter's got some bash hair going on. Um,
Mhm.
so that's
Just
cool.
like a thing in general. I've not really been that knowledgeable about American comics going into this. I'm much more of a video game person. I don't even watch that much anime. Some people might even say I hate anime. Sometimes. Um, for the most part. But it's what makes it very interesting, at least in my opinion, when looking at Trigun and why, for example, Trigun means that much to me, is that I don't think Naito is the best artist ever. And I don't think he's the best storyteller ever or the best writer ever. But what Trigun is, and I hope that other people who might get into the manga would feel, is that it's just genuine. He loves what he's doing. He loves his story. He loves his character. He wants to have fun. He wants to have fun drawing. He wants to tell the story that he wants to tell. He's not trying to appease anyone. He is simply doing what he wanted to do, what makes him happy, and then you can, through that, feel the happiness and joy in his work. He just draws a pose and he's like, bam, there it is. You know, he's not like trying to think about anatomy. He's not trying to always think about whether this page makes a lot of sense, which is where sometimes the visual difficulty of finding out what the hell is even going on the page can come in. He just does, he draws what he visualized in his head the best way he can. And that's why he himself, in an interview, explained that he then knows that there might be some connections between the movements that are missing, and that is what makes it a little hard to follow, because in his head he has already seen the whole scene, right? So he has all the missing pieces that we don't. But so he tries to like break down the scenes that he imagines in his head into like little biteable pieces of like poses after poses after poses to make it interesting. And in that way, not the best artist, but an extremely genuine artist whose transformation and growth you can feel through his work from the beginning to the end. You can see him improve in more ways than just visually. Better visual storytelling, better art, better writing even. And that is just a very nice thing to experience as an artist, to see that even the professionals have growth to do. You know,
And
it's not like. Go on.
oh, sorry. I was going to add that, and he's embraced it. Um, you can see with his growth in Trigun and even his current ongoing series, uh, Blood Blockade Battlefront or Kekai Sensen, as it's called in Japanese. Like he's constantly exploring, he's constantly growing, he's constantly like, what can I do next? What other cool things can I draw? What other cool stories can I tell? There's so much passion in his work.
And that's where the other like thing you can then feel in his own enjoyment is when he adds these little nudges and Easter eggs to all the things that he enjoys into it for people to catch, like the grifter bottle.
Yeah.
The whole experience of reading Trigun and seeing his art feels like it's his very earnest heart put up on a little platter, humbly offered to us, and saying, "Isn't this cool?" And we saying back, "Yeah, that hell yes it is."
Exactly. And that's what I
Um,
love about it. It is human, it's genuine, it's loving and very well beloved by its creator as well.
yeah, you can. Yeah, he clearly still loves his work in that, and I think that's a really refreshing thing to see because we're always told to be humble and not really pat ourselves on the back, but he kind of does. Like he gets excited for himself. Like you see at the little end things, like when McFarlane approached him to make a figure, or even when his stuff gets adapted into an anime. Like there's a Trigun Stampede interview where he talks about the first time he viewed it and how his heart was racing and his palms were sweating and he wanted to cry because he was having so much fun. So and he's just enjoying his own media that way. Like I think that's really just sweet and earnest.
And I think too he enjoys seeing other people's interpretations of his work. That it's sort of like, hey, I made this sandbox, and I'm delighted to have someone who wants to come and play with me.
Right.
Uh,
That is a good way to say how it feels to be a part of Trigun in any way.
I definitely don't think it's like a break on humility to be excited for yourself, because if you have to love your own character and your own writing and your own art if anybody else is supposed to love it, because if you can't love it yourself, then why should others love it? the fact that he loves it, it's what makes it interesting. That is what catches people's attention. So I think the fact that he gets excited for it is a good reason for everybody else to get excited for it. And I think that's exactly why like people like it, is because he's excited about it.
I love that little I forget what you call it, but when it's his comics of him when he's the little bean, his bean self, and
Oh yeah.
he says to the readers, he's like, "Wow, you've all really taken to Vash. Like, I'm glad you like him so much." Like, and it's just really cute and sweet. And I'm just like, hell yeah, I love Vash. Um, he's the guy of all guys. Thank you. So yeah, so I just yeah, it's just it's nice to have a creator that's, like you said, so in love with his work, and it kind of just spills out of the page and makes you fall in love with it too. And he kind of does that with his characters too. He creates characters that fall like that admire or have, his main character, and it makes you also kind of fall in love with the character. Not like shipwise. I'm just talking in general, like enjoying the media and the characters.
Mhm.
But he's kind of
Oh,
sneaky that way. I don't know if it's intentional.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, he's just really focused on characters. His stories are also character driven. Like, yes, I think with with Trigun, the setting and the context of the planet Gunsmoke and the world building and very important, especially like when you get into kind of the more literary analysis of characters' philosophies and their choices, and all of that kind of um, deeper stuff. But like at the end of the day, it's the characters that drive the story. It's the characters that the audience connects with. I think about something like Lord of the Rings, for example. It's very world buildy. It's all driven by the world and the setting and the context and the deep history and the lore of Middle Earth. And Gunsmoke, it's Naito saying like, "Hey, here's some dope sand crawlers and bandits with spikes."
Worms.
But really, what drives the story is Vash and his friends.
What's like really special about Trigun's characters? It brings to mind something that occasionally people are talking about. There is like the Miyazaki quote with "anime was a mistake," and I think that quote unfortunately gets taken out of context a lot because it sounds funny that just anime is a mistake. But what that whole bit was originally about was that he thought modern anime was a mistake because it was anime created by people who don't like other people for people who don't like other people, or at least don't spend time with people. So all characters become inhuman because the people making and writing these characters are not actually spending time with other people. So it's like shut-ins making content for shut-ins. They don't really know how people work. And that is reflected in how they present characters. That is something then that I get brought comes to mind when I'm then reading Trigun, because these characters feel so human because Naito is a very human person. He is extremely outgoing when you see him. He does also express a lot of his own like emotions in his little bean comics, as we talked about, both
Yeah.
like being scared, being happy, being nervous, being frustrated with things. Like he just in general has a lot of love for people, and that is also why his manga very much also surrounds the whole topic of loving humanity despite its flaws for all the good that they do as well, because humans just do what humans do, and we're full of good and we're full of bad, and that does not should not take away from our chance to make a better tomorrow by communicating with each other. So it's clear that the man has a lot of love for people and has also understands people, because the Trigun characters then we see in the manga are exactly that, very very complex humans with complex emotions, both good and bad. We don't just have somebody who's good or bad across the board. They're all mixed up with all kinds of things that can both like just not fully justify certain actions, but can
Yeah.
definitely explain the flawed nature of living beings and our
Yeah, he's
tendency of falling to despair, of falling to suffering, or misguided justice, or misguided help.
yeah, he's very good at showcasing humanity as fallible creatures, and it's funny you bring up the connection piece too, not to be super spoilery, spoiler warning I guess, but that's honestly, at least my reading and interpretation, that is the conflict resolution for the story. It's first foreshadowed with little baby knives and saying as long as we can communicate, and he loses his way. And then it's Vash, there's the panels with Vash telling Meryl that they need to communicate and connect. Like you said, like that connection to humanity and with among each other. Like I feel like that's one of Trigun's core messages within the story itself, not just Naito's
Mhm.
probably life philosophy and how he is as a person, but he explicitly puts it like pen to paper.
Which is also
Yeah.
reflected in something else you might see in the art, which is the fact that he has spent so much time designing the uniqueness of even background characters. Everybody's dressed differently, looks unique, special, like because every person is important. It's sort of like the same philosophy that Nintendo used, for example, with the Legend of Zelda games, is that all NPCs has to be unique because that is what makes them special. Like if everybody just looks the same, that takes away the magic of the
Well, and
world.
it goes back to too, like we've all I think all agree, like world building is not Naito's forte. He doesn't build his world with the world and the history itself, but the people that live in it. So yeah. Um he really puts the focus on them and everything else is kind of peripheral. And I love how he does that too. Even with characters not his own, he included them in the manga later. So like 98 original characters came up in
Yeah.
that. The, when Vash is, it's one of the times he faces Knives. I think it's when Knives is still part of the arc, and you get all of like the, oh, what am I thinking of? Like the montage panels, and there's a lot of 98 characters in there, and that's the only time they're in the manga. But the fact that Naito took the time to stop and draw them and sit time with them, um, I don't know. It's just it's a nice sentiment because it's like respect for the other people that adapted his work, but also to him recognizing that they're also part of his world in some way, the world he
Yeah.
created.
It's part of that. It becomes a conversation.
Yeah.
Becomes a communication then. Um, and Easter eggs, which
Yes.
Naito loves, which nerds love.
He even has product placement, which is I have mixed feelings. I don't like seeing it in like regular westernized media, but for some reason it's charming in his work. Like the fact that
Mhm.
like so humanity's struggling on No Man's Land or Gunsmoke, but they still have Heinz ketchup and what I think is Dash's bodysuit came from Prada because it's got the logo on the back of his neck. So it's yeah, it's just fun. So like there's the nerd nods, just like things in our own life. It's just cute that he takes the time to draw that all out.
Yeah, he loves his details.
Isn't Bash's coat too based on Spawn's coat? Like how it moves and flutters?
That
For
wouldn't
sure.
surprise me.
I've read that somewhere. I need to find that. But yeah, so I feel like yeah, his work is just an amalgamation of everything Naito loves or thinks is interesting, or just it's as simple of that looks cool. I'm gonna draw it.
I think it's a lot of "That looks cool, I'm gonna draw
Yeah,
it," which
and
again is, like, so much fun as a reader, that it takes some getting used to at first, but I think, at the end
Night
of the day,
Wolfwood
it's just
scoliosis
delightful.
coming to yeah, Wolfwood
Mm,
scoliosis coming
mhm.
top of mind. That looks cool.
Yes.
So
I mean, it's very that's where the JoJo references comes in.
right. Are you looking for a drink that packs a punch and a story to tell? Look no further than Grifter Whiskey. Made with the finest ingredients and distilled to perfection, this whiskey is sure to impress even the most discerning drinker. With its smooth flavor and powerful kick, Grifter whiskey is the perfect way to end a long day of work or to kick off a night of adventure. So why settle for any whiskey when you can have the best? Try Grifter whiskey tonight. So let's dig into Nighthow's writing, because we've kind of touched on it, but let's get into it.
Into the juicy bit of it.
Yes.
That really shines through a lot through some of the translation work, because one part of translation is scientific. That's obviously the direct translation, the doing it correctly and all that stuff. But then there's also the art side of translation, which is localization. And right now localization has a little bit of a bad rep, because localization, I think, is the part where most translators mess up, especially in fan projects, because that's when you have to get a little subjective, because there are things you simply cannot translate directly, so the objective aspect of translation can no longer help you. That is, for example, with turns of phrases, just speech patterns, so on and so forth, that you cannot really directly translate into English. One of these examples, for example, is Wolfwood's dialect in Japanese, is the Kenzayaban, and you can't really make that into English. So you got to find out in what way will you portray his dialect in English. Which is where we've taken the subjective decision of giving him a little bit of an unspecified Southern American. So it can be like cowboy or Southern, like Bible Belt Southern. And while I'm partial to this Bible Belt Southern, some people might read it more as a cowboy thing, and that's the whole purpose of it, was just that it was an indicator that he has an accent in our translation. But what exactly you are hearing as a reader is up to you. It just to make sure that he has that experience, because that is a part of Naito's writing, that he is talking like that in Japanese, which also makes him difficult to translate.
Yeah, it's about finding a balance to give that flavor, for lack of a better word, without it being overwhelming, or distracting from distracting the attention from what's actually going on. It's actually the story, happening in the story. But it's something that we really had to do by feel most of the time, and we kind of ended up developing sort of our own systems for Wolfwood's speech patterns and our own translation. But again, it's not hard and fast. It's a lot depends on the context of what's going on, from page to page, scene to scene. Um, uh, where the other character is that he's interacting with. Is he having a big internal monologue, or is he shouting at Vash to get his ass in gear? All of those affect how we handled Wolfwood's dialect in our writing of it.
Which also where it becomes very interesting when it comes to character swearing, because the Japanese language is a little restrictive when it comes to their options for swearing. So you might see the same word being used to swear over and over and over again, but the English language is blessed with a vast vocabulary for very, very uncouth show displays of anger. Uh, so we have a lot to pick from.
So much to pick from.
And that again also comes down to character and character per character, how they talk and how they swear. Because Wolfwood swears, and we certainly let him drop the F-bomb more than a few times. Especially because I read in one interview by of Naito again, talking about Wolfwood and how he wanted a lot of things about Wolfwood's behavior to exhume like anger, like violence. He is, to begin with, violent, and so is his language, and that's also why he is a little rough around the edges with his language. Yet internally, in his mind, he's a deeply thoughtful person stuck between a rock and a hard place. So outwards, like he's baring his fangs and everybody else around him, but inside, he's soft and puddle. And so that comes out in his language and the swearing options he has for our translation, whereas Vash never gets to say fuck. That's the rule. Vash never gets to say fuck, but he gets to say shit. And he does gets to say a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
Meryl never swears. Neither does Millie. Millie will call somebody, and does at one point call somebody names. But it's not like the hardcore swearing from either of them. Wolfo gets the heavy accent. Vash has a little bit more of a casual speech pattern when he talks in Japanese as well. So he still has the wanna gonna in his language. So he's just casual, relaxed, the most like basic, fluid American English, specifically American English, which is what the English we went for, and not British English. You might notice that in the spelling as well, that is the US English we're going for.
I think there's an
Which
interview
is
too where Naito said that Project Seeds is an American company too.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
he
meant to
also
be,
like canonically imagines the people of the planet to speak English,
yeah.
which is why the signs are in English.
Yep.
That's where Meryl has a little bit more of a professional speech. She does not put her words together like that. She's uses big words more frequently than the other characters do.
yeah, she uses we tried to give her a very uh polite, proper grammar, very polished, educated sort of business English when you're translating her.
Emily just gets a lot of fluff. She too is quite casual in the way she speaks. Obviously, we hadn't gone for her. Some people occasionally have portrayed Millie as being a little simple, but that is not Millie. Millie is smart. She is
Yeah.
smart. She's just relaxed and very, very human, a very warm person. And that, again, is something that comes out in her language, is that she's simply casual. Emotionally in tune with a lot of things.
How did you guys have to? He seems like he'd be kind of cold, but he's a cold and kind of direct character. How does that like translate to like words he uses when translating from Japanese to English?
Knives' dialogue is a little interesting in
Mm-hmm.
Japanese, as he's clearly has like a very grandiose, very dramatic way of speaking. He says a lot of dramatic things, and there will be more than a few dramatic lines out of him in the manga. But as a man who quotes Shakespeare, he has to be that way because he quotes Shakespeare at one point in the manga. So we all know what kind of person he is to some extent. But
And it's interesting too because his language changes when he's talking to Vash versus talking to anyone else.
yes,
How so? What changes? Is it like his tone or just his word choice?
he
Uh, oh, I'll let you take that, D.
he is obviously more cold towards other characters that is Vash, but he has, especially later, a very, very strong wording of control, of wanting to control Vash and kind of control his way of thought. It's a deep frustration. There's a lot of emotion that comes out when it's Vash. He's talking to everybody else. They are shadows. They are animals to him. So he is aggressive and brief in his talk when it comes to others. But there is a particular violence in Knives' language as well when speaking of humans, for example. He is extremely emotionally charged. He's just very melodramatic about it.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's like where Legato is also a very interesting character when it comes to speech patterns, because he too is even more melodramatic. Uh, but once again, he only seems to have a particular interest in Bash and knives. And so everybody else he's pretty brief with, beyond Elandira, of course,
Mhm.
which does bring out a lot of like angry emotions from him. Elandira is another character that's super interesting, translating as well, because she has a particular speech pattern in Japanese as well, which is often a speech pattern used for trans characters in Japanese media. Yet she is clearly extremely refined, slightly, if not very, sarcastic, uh, and very. She's like a cold, calculative, confident. She does not like boast or grandstand. She knows what her power is. Um, of course, it's also like funny than how other characters speak about her, because it's the pronouns used towards her is a neutral pronoun for the most part, but the way in which also Elandira speaks and presents herself is clearly meant to be a she.
Hmm.
And so all the characters are, mind you, Japan is very normal about using a neutral or gender neutral pronouns. It is very much contextual whether that is supposed to be a he or a she. And in this case, we know very clearly that Naito intends it for it to be a she, which is also why he has that one introductionary scene of her that I've seen like few criticize the scene where Rhaenyra gets introduced. She falls on her ass and then she starts like swearing at the pilot, and then
Hmm.
Meryl is like, "Oh, a trans woman, but she has a better figure than me." And I know that is like a contrived dialogue moment, but I think it was because it was very important for Naito to make sure that you know it's a trans character. This is the
Hmm.
only way to kind of make sure that the reader knows 100% that this is meant to be a trans character and not just a woman, because Elandira looks like a woman for all intents and purposes. Um,
Yeah, and that when Meryl clocks her, that uh I think too, like, yes, you're saying, D, that it's a very contrived line. It hasn't aged well over the past 20 years. But I think the intent as well is to show that Meryl immediately finds something to admire about Elendira upon her introduction.
yeah, we're very, very obviously being told immediately that Elandira is beautiful and powerful. And everybody's kind of like the whole fucking fight stops the moment she shows up. She controls everything the second she's there.
Thanks.
And
I
And
Wolfwood, who is already a very powerful individual at this point, is terrified. Like, holy shit, it's her. You know?
he's like shitting his pants.
I think there's an interview where Naito explicitly says he wanted to create of the Gung Ho Guns a character that was this when he thought about who would be the strongest. That's when Elandira was conceptualized.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's also, again, I just feel it was just extremely important for Naito to make sure that you know it's a trans character. Like, never forget that, which is
Hmm.
ally response right there. Great ally work. Because then again, we have Wolfwood misgendering her and immediately corrects himself. Just so again, and then they continue as if nothing happened. Just so again, you're reminded this is a trans character. And she's still kicking everyone's ass.
Yeah.
And then again, later, Vash and Livio have a conversation about her where he says, "Oh, that powerful trans woman." Again, it's a trans character, don't you forget. And
Was
they
it
don't.
is it the Dark Horse one though, where he like swears? He uses a derogatory swear word for her, or is it the
Oh,
overhaul?
it's Vash does use a very negative pronoun when he calls Ilandira that bitch. That's
Yeah.
why it's translated to that bitch, because that is what he says. There is no other way to properly localize the very, very negative pronoun that Dash uses when he says her. We could have just have written her and then maybe like made it italics or something, but it does not convey the same level of contempt that he has in that moment. And it's also a bit of like Vash's character growth that he becomes more capable of just like really, really being tired of something at this point. That
He
he's just
does
like
turn up
that bitch.
he does turn up the sass in the later volumes. My one of
Mhm.
my favorite panels is when he's confronting Knives and he says, "I'll tell you if you settle down." Like,
Oh, you want to talk about it?
yeah, yeah, it's like I love Sassy Vash is one of my favorites. And it's yeah, you're right. It's like there's this exhaustion or just he's kind of over it and it comes out more and he's not being less polite.
Yeah.
It's in this scene too, the that bitch scene that where the scanlation, which is the previous
Ugh,
fan translation, did some
yeah.
very questionable work. Beyond some
Yes.
other interesting moments throughout the manga of adding edgy content that is not in the text at all, such as like suddenly making a character pedophile who isn't a pedophile at all in the original text,
Mm.
having Mid Valley say use the F word as the slur towards gay people, which is also not in the text at all originally. And in this scene, instead of apparently not understanding the negative pronoun that Vash used and translating that accordingly, they used it. So they called Elandira and it a couple of times in that scene for some reason. And
Yeah.
and that's like where you see some of that the opinions of writers probably showing through a little bit of like that it's never appropriate to call a trans person an it,
No.
unless they desire so themselves, pronoun choice wise. Um, and yeah, as I know in the case of the Dark Horse translation, they also use that bitch, which is incorrect. But they, because of the translation being older and being from the early 2000s, they used the word transvestite, which was acceptable back then, but not now. That's also why we've made the choice to go with trans woman, because that is the currently acceptable term for a trans woman. Um, it was not, of course, not a decision entirely made in a vacuum, though, because I did look into the
Mm.
history of the word that Naito used, which is the okama, and then the point where Naito made these chapters and used that word, that was the in Japan considered the acceptable term to use towards a trans individual, even by the trans community in Japan itself. So Naito's intention was not to be offensive, therefore we follow suit with a present time translation to do the same.
Right, localizing for current times. So is that something too? It's been a couple years, and like when you look back on the first version, something you guys will be considering and looking at with 2.0. Not that
Oh,
I like, or do you think like you feel like you've covered like the main bits, like that's localized to current times already?
I do believe like the main bits of localization has definitely been covered. A lot of the content is for the most part pretty straightforward. Um, there is a line which I don't think I have any intention of changing, where I changed uh now I can't specifically remember, but where Vash talks about like being chased by the hounds of hell
Mm.
or having the god of death following him. And those are like localization of like Japanese terms that were originally used, like Japanese gods or spirits or other concepts like that. And while I know that was the what he used intentionally in the text itself for the Japanese, that is something I've decided to change into more English appropriate ones. Um, Not to any erasure of Japanese culture, obviously, but it is to not have to explain what it actually is that he just said, and
Oh,
what is this entity that is being referenced to.
Yeah, it's a matter of like what is an American English speaking reading audience going to understand to get the same idea, the same flavor, the same weight across. So it's more of a matter of finding an idiom or like expressions uh, that better suit what an what our English reading audience would understand quickly. So again, they can get on to the next thing.
I would
And
think
it's
too,
also
by you doing that, it's showing respect to Naito and his intent. You're westernizing the space western, so I think you're okay.
yeah, but of course it's something that isn't worth discussing to have potentially a page where every single localization choice is being written down for people to know what is being used originally, because obviously we have no intent of erasing Japanese culture.
Right.
In this case, it was a localization decision made to stay within the aesthetic. I made another localization choice. This is one I might consider changing again, but originally I changed a term of phrase Vash uses to make more sense for the actual setting, because he says it felt like being in a boxing match with an octopus with steel gloves. And it's like, well, there's no octopi on this planet. So I changed it to being run over by a herd of toma.
I love that one. I do like that translate. I do enjoy that one a lot. I
And
am a horse
while
girl, so I love the Toma. So any inserts of them, I'm all for.
oh yeah, that's another thing. Realizing that toma is both the singular and plural. It's not like Thomas's. It's toma.
Okay, so is it? Oh, it's just Toma. So Thomas isn't even the right word for it. That's a
No, that
98.
was an old English localization, a mistake from the '98 anime.
Oh,
Interesting.
see, I didn't even realize that.
Because I always thought Thomas was singular and then Toma was plural, but it's just all Toma.
It's all toma.
Oh, thanks for the clarification. But yeah, like especially like people that have watched 98 for a while or did like it's like Gunsmoke and No Man's Land. They're both right and kind of in a sense, but yeah, true canon is probably Toma and No Man's Land.
Yeah, Gunsmoke is only a name that was used for a figure line,
And Thomas was
and the
the
Planet Gunsmoke game that never came to be.
yeah. And Thomas
Uh,
is the English translation for the VAs during recording back in the day.
yeah, they read Toma and then thought Thomas, and then they made it Thomas's, but it's Toma. Toma
Interesting.
and two Toma.
I'm going to the exhibition in March, in Tokyo, and Naito's gonna be there.
Ooh.
And I'm trying to think of a question to ask him. It might be the Toma question, like just like really nail it down.
I mean, I am partial to Thomas as well. I do like that too, but we just stuck with the Toma.
Yeah.
Um, just because it sounds more alien as well. But that is how it's written. It's Toma.
What is it? It's like because he's a big Star Wars buff. It's what is that? Is it the Tauntaun? What is the
Yeah, tauntauns.
yeah, so I bet that's kind of where he gets phonetically for the name of his critters.
Yeah, Tauntaun, Toma. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, in general, of course, is that you need like a lot of restraint and a lot of discipline to do localization properly. Because of course, there's gonna be some decisions not everybody's gonna be happy with, but you can't at the same time make everybody happy. And you will at some point have to do something that might feel like culture references here and there. Of course, I'm not gonna do a jelly donut is my favorite situation, of course.
For kids.
Like change something that's like in plain sight, and you can't really change. But to stay within the aesthetic and the westernizing the western, a space western. Um, it's unfortunate that a lot of localizers in today today's world are getting so much bad rep as they are, but there are a lot of people who are doing like the volunteer work, that the free work and hobby work that does not have the same I think discipline, because you also got to make sure that your translation stays with the times. You can't use slang that is important now and have your translation keep up with the times 20 years later.
Yeah.
Word hype. We can't use the was it skibbity or something. It won't age well.
Yeah.
You gotta
No
like
skibbity and
just
Trigun.
no
Yeah.
gyats and skibbity and all that stuff, right? And but at the same time, what's also happening a lot, which is very unfortunate, is the forcible introduction of a localizer's own opinions into the thing. So if there's a joke they don't like, they gotta remove it just because they didn't like the joke, and or insert political ideology or political opinions, just like the Scanlation team calling Elongiran it. It is not their business to insert their beliefs into what you're translating. No matter what's on the page, no matter how problematic you might find something on the page, you cannot change it because that is how it's supposed to be. And that
Right.
is something some localizers have lost track of. And as Vol likes to call it, they did not check their ego at the door.
Right. No, it's censorship of art. Like that's Naito's artistic expression, and when they do that, they're censoring him and what he created.
It's not
Yeah.
just like censoring, it is just downright just saying that I'm gonna work on this guy's product, but I don't actually like what the guy is saying, so I'm just gonna change it to something else.
Yeah. I think you're okay too with some of the idioms and things you chose to like between the Japanese cultural references and then westernized. Something to remember is that bonus panel when Naito worked with McFarlane and he sent the sketch in and he tells the American company to do an American gun check on Vash. So, I, I think it sounds like you're being very intentional and respectful with any changes like that that need to be made, and um,
We
it's
made another really fun change.
oh, what was that?
It was for the Wolfwood spin-off.
Oh, Freedbird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't you tell that one, Wolf?
Yeah, so this is the freed bird, not Freebird. It took me so long to realize that there's actually, like, a D at the end of the word freed.
Yes.
Skinner too strong.
Yeah, so anyway, it's, just, like, what is it? Like, 2-chapter, story of,
Just one.
oh, just one? Is that all it is? Okay, yeah, 1
Yeah.
chapter story of Wolfwood. I think it was, written in between the original a Trigun manga, or like, yeah, volumes 1 and 2 of like the OG Trigun manga and Trigun Maximum, but not published till later, so correct me if I'm wrong on that, D.
It was between Trimax 1 and Trimax 2.
Oh, Trimax 1 and 2. Okay, thank you. Um but basically Wolfwood kind of gets tangled up in the problems of this teenage girl, and this guy who's trying to who's trying to marry her, force her to marry him. And at one point, I don't remember if it's the guy or his goons or whatever, they beat Wolfwood up and they tell him to mind his own business.
It's the guy
uh
himself.
oh, the guy himself, yeah. Thank you, it's been a while since I read it, so um there's the Trigun Encyclopedia. But while we were working on that chapter, I said, "Hey, what if we change the line just a little bit? Like, I know this isn't what the text says, but wouldn't it be really funny if he tells Wolfwood to keep his big nose
Out
out
of
of his
him.
business?"
Instead of just keep his nose out of his business, like keep your big
Yeah,
nose out of his.
keep your big nose out of my business. Um, and we all had a good laugh about that and decided, like, you know what, we can just add one little adjective that's a treat.
I I
One
like it.
little joke.
I like
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I think it's in Naito's spirit because there's that one. I think it's Desperado chapter,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and whatever little side antagonist of the week, the flavor of the week, calls out Vash's character design and says this pretty boy. So it's in that same vein. Just add the big nose, you know.
Oh, it was not in
Mhm.
Desperado. It was
Oh, was it?
What
What's
was
it?
it?
the second chapter in volume 6
That's right. Why did I
when
think it's
the Yin
Desperado?
Yang brothers.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yes,
Those
yes, that's right.
yahoos.
There's another funny reference in there, which is Godot.
They're waiting for
Because they're
Godot.
waiting for him.
Uh, Man, if I didn't know any better, I'd say, Naito took a couple courses in, Western drama.
Just a little bit. Just have a separate lobe in my brain for Trigun, clearly. It's been a
Yes.
long time since I've worked on Trigun, and yet it's just like, oh yeah, I remember when somebody called Vash a pretty boy. How could I forget? Very important stuff.
People are like, oh, he's not a pretty boy, and it's like it's canon in the manga. It's called
It's
Mhm.
out.
literally canon, yeah.
Yeah.
So
He's a lot prettier than everybody else on No Man's Land.
They're like deceptively pretty. So you can
the,
definitely imagine that that has disarmed a few people in Knife's case until they are actually disarmed.
yeah, kind of lures him in like a spider.
Ha ha ha. Don't tell Knives that. I don't think he'll appreciate being called a spider.
Mm-mm. He thinks he's the butterfly. 98 reference.
Another interesting aspect of the translation work is with the fact that I'm bilingual or trilingual. So English is not my first language, which is probably quite apparent to those listening in. Um, that gives me like a different way of looking at English and how I'm using English, but also how important it is to be fully aware of sentence structure and so on and so forth. So it has also given us some few funny experiences when working together and working on the English language. When turns out that I've like grown up using British English, and we find out various grammatical things that are different, such as if anyone is plural or not is different depending on American English and British English, or
Mm.
where we
And
put our
now,
dots and when we use our commas.
and I'm sure too, like, so I think you're Midwestern, and then Arth is from the South, so you're really getting a,
Yeah, and
a
even
master class in American English and how different it can be within our own language.
yeah, and even, like, between Arth and I, there sometimes has been disagreement, between, like, what sounds better because, sometimes, like, I'll think, "Oh, well, this sounds better," and Arth will be like, "I don't know anybody who says that. Nobody says it like that." And I'm like, "Okay, well, okay, why do I say things like that? Or why did I choose this phrasing for the translation?" So, uh, even as a native English speaker, I've learned so much more about how I speak and why. Having to have all of these discussions about what I'm saying, like what's being said in the text, the Trigun text, and why I'm suggesting things, which I think is like really valuable because I think it's so easy to take whatever language we use in our daily lives for granted. Um, to have the opportunity to just like sit down and examine that and
Mhm.
sometimes it comes down to looking up, okay, well, okay, Google, like what is the actual grammatically correct
Why do we
way
do
of
the things we
saying
do?
it?
Oh,
Yeah,
so
and do we want the characters to say things that way
I actually have
or
a
to be
question
incorrect?
for
Yeah.
you with Millie, because a lot of her like little gags that Naito gives her is she doesn't say phrases right, like phonetically it sounds right, but you have to do a double take. And I'm wondering how, like, between like the Japanese and like wording, how much you had to kind of manhandle to make it fit that Millie's gag for the English translation.
It's usually pretty straightforward. What she
Okay.
says. Uh,
Like,
she
trying to
says
think of it.
the wrong word, but you know what she means to say.
Yeah.
So it's mm,
Trying to think of an example so for the listeners so they know what we're talking about.
I definitely know there's the when she wants to say that this is Spartan. Well, she's being said that she is quite Spartan. She's like, oh, I eat that all the time, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Neapolitan.
Yeah, Daryl's like, I think you mean Neapolitan, yeah. Um,
I will say
there's
it
a
was in multiple bullets. The Millie Merrill TV chapter was horrendous.
Oh,
That way, trying
oh,
because there's a lot of puns, a lot of very so we really had a time of it. I think D most of all working on the raw translation.
yeah,
And
I spent like a whole
um
fucking evening on just one bit of it. It was
yeah.
the Millie Merrill chapter from. Oh yeah, also just to tie a knot on like the whole thing with or put an end on the end of the Millie bit. It's only
Mhm.
in Trigun Volume 1 that's a thing, and it's never seen again. Then Millie just
man,
talks like everybody
I
else
feel
does.
like Naito should have continued that. We needed the laughs in Trigun Maximum. We needed the breaks, sir. Although he's really good at
I mean, it's not in
visual.
Trigun Maximum. Trigun Maximum is just when everything just stops being fun.
Yeah.
Except for
I mean,
Meryl, maybe. She's just a little more I don't know what to
yeah,
say. Like she's a little more snappy.
yeah.
Um,
She's a little more cantankerous in Trigun Maximum. He does a
Mhm.
lot
but
more visual humor in Trigun Maximum, like little side panels or in betweens with the characters where like volume 10 and the big fight, and then there's still little moments where it's super serious and like it's distressing, and then there'll be like one or two panels and he draws them silly and it's like, what are you doing to me?
Yeah.
we need that little breather. But though
Yeah.
that Meryl Millie chapter from Multiple Bullets. This is like a localizer nightmare. Um
I do love that chapter though.
I mean, it's great. It's great because now you can understand it because of the translation it was given, right? But for me, it wasn't fun.
Oh no.
It was a little fun, but it was
Yeah.
not fun
And
because everything is a Japanese culture reference. Every goddamn thing was.
Yeah, a fan promptly corrected me when I made a Lord Farquaad and like, actually it's so and so from this Japanese show, and I'm like, I did not know, I'm sorry. So
But there's more to Vash's disguise than just that, because Vash does say that in the end of Trigun Maximum. Like at the end of Volume 14, he exactly describes the disguise he uses in that scene as well.
yeah, that's a
So
cute
so
reference.
yeah, it's a reference to that bit that yeah, he's like, I'm gonna put on a mustache, fake teeth, and get some wig, and well, lo and behold, there he is. Um,
Yep.
but there's definitely God, there's so much in that one. Um, First of all, there is the fact that they're making a TV show like this. So there's a lot of like tropes from Japanese TV going on because now they bought the screen time, so now they're gonna fill it out with something. And they make the cooking show, and it's all messed up because they haven't really planned how they were gonna do that. But one particular one that's pretty interesting that I do not like adding translators notes in the margins of the pages. I like to keep the margins clean. Here I had to because the text is literally on the panel. Um, but I did call. So it's basically in a downtime between the episodes. The camera starts rolling without them knowing, and Meryl is frustrated that they have not gotten certain kind of content in their filming. And then the joke is in Japanese that she keeps this extremely orally woman keeps repeating the word "perori" over and over again because that's a naughty word. And that's what I had to add what I called it then in the text. I call it naughty fan service because that's what it is. That's the Japanese word for it. It's porori. So I then added what porori is, and that's like again tropes of naughty fan service tropes like panty shots, bathhouse scenes, towel slips, things like that. So Mara's complaining that they didn't get more nudity of Vash in their show, and gets caught on camera saying that, which is funny. Um, and another one is then when they looking for him, they're trying to make a skit about like looking for him, and Meryl tries to douse for him with dowsing rods, and
Yeah.
and then Millie is trying to like make some jokes about it, and then when she mentions the first time that a certain spirit told her something about like what he could potentially be, what Vash could potentially be. Here, Millie uses the name of a particular Japanese spirit that I don't remember right now. It's like a fox-like spirit, so it's a little bit of a trickster kind of thing. And since we're not really able to explain what that is, that's where the Ouija board came in instead. Because they do use a board kind of like that, also to contact spirits for Torigays in Japanese culture. But here we're fully just going on ghost mode. That ghost is starting to talk to her through the board. It's also where we got the where Millie like asks about the dowsing rods, and we had to come up with a new pun because she makes like a teriyaki chicken pun that only works in Japanese. So we had to make an English food pun that would be appropriate. And that's where Arth came in clutch with with the human Thai food detector.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
humanoid type
great.
food. And we were pounding our heads against the wall, and Arth just like saunters into chat like, "Oh, humanoid Thai food."
Humanoid Thai
It's like,
food.
that is brilliant.
That is, I
I'm
love it.
so jealous.
Ah, that's
And
so
that's just
clever.
yeah, and then eventually the spirit through the Ouija board just turns out to be Wolfwood
That
possessing Millie to look for Vash, and then he ends up doing the exact same thing.
that whole chapter has so many good little bits in it. So the mangaka that did that, slow clap for you. That one makes me laugh a lot.
It also really underlines the importance of Wolfwood's dialect because he would be speaking with Millie's voice when possessing her, yet Olivia, who was watching the TV, could tell it was him.
Right.
So that's something.
Thanks for listening in to part 1 of this episode. Tune in for part 2 with me, Music Meg, and the Trigun Ultimate Overhaul Team to discuss the manga's story and impact on its readers. Coming soon!